Paris Perspective.
Now, in this edition of Paris Perspective, we're going to take a look at the role of the French military in the 2020s, military cooperation with allied forces, as well as the current state of French deployment in Africa and elsewhere around the world. General Dominique Trinquand is the Director of External and UN Relations at Marck and Balsan, who has participated in military operations in Lebanon, the former Yugoslavia, and Africa. General Dominique Trinquand, you're very welcome to the programme today.
Thank you very much.
Now, you have extensive experience in international relations and in multinational scenarios at the United Nations, the European Union, and of course NATO. But seeing that France is under the spotlight from our Paris perspective today, let's start with the country's most significant engagement, and that is Operation Barkhane, that is leading the fight against jihadists in cooperation with the G5 Sahel group of countries. To give a quick resume, that's Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. Now, that's the reason we call them the G5, and why this is all happening there is, of course, because that's where the jihadists are operational across their porous borders in the region. Following a virtual G5 Sahel summit earlier this month of February, President Emmanuel Macron declared that there were no significant plans to adjust France's military presence in the region. And this comes a year after boosting the force to over 5,000 troops 12 months ago, if I'm correct. Why was there a turnaround, though? Because he had said that the presence would be adjusted. Has he changed his tack towards the G5?
I think that we must go back to 1 year ago. And the decision, there were three types of decision, in fact, in the summit in Pau. The first one was to increase the number of soldiers by 600. The second one was to concentrate the effort in the three border zone between Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso. And the third one was to establish a common headquarters to command all the forces. After 1 year, what we can say is that there was an increase in the fight against jihadists, a successful at tactical level. But of course, there was an increase on the French media and the French citizen after several attacks in the last 2 or 3 months. And I think that's why the president was asking himself, will we continue like that, or we will stop the increase, meaning at least reducing the 600? And that was not the case. The decision was not that decision.
So he's following it through, and would that be on the back of now it's 55 deaths, I think, of French forces since the operation began back in 2014? Was it this spike, let's just say, in deaths that would have maybe made him change his mind and dig his heels in further? Is that what you think it might have been?
Yeah, I think that he had the right briefing by the military saying that we are currently successful. We need to increase the power of the G5 countries. And the last two operations, Eclipse and Bourrasque, were operation where 2/3 of the forces were African, were not French. And the second thing is that it's also the increase of the European country through the special forces and Takuba. And because this is still on the way and they are success, I think that he decided, what you put forward the figure of 55 deaths. It's one is already too much, of course. But if you compare that to Yugoslavia, to Afghanistan, to all the theater of operation, you think that in 8 years, 55 dead is not big. In fact, it's a small figure.
And you mentioned that Takuba. We'll get onto that maybe in a while. But in the summit that concluded there recently, Chadian President Idriss Déby was lamenting the fact, you have said about the G5 forces were making up 2/3 of the operations there, but he was lamenting the fact that the force itself isn't self-sufficient. Poor funding, it's been plagued by poor funding, that there's inadequate equipment, there's a lack of training. But France's role in this, is France the only one that the G5 can turn to turn this situation around?
No, I think that you're right, quoting the Chad and the President Idriss Déby, because he had already said a year ago that he will deploy a battalion. Now he's saying that he is deploying 1,200 forces. But it needs the funding to deploy that, meaning that it will be European Union or the French who will pay for the soldier and for the deployment. And it's a difficult situation when we ask more G5 country, but when they say, okay, we'll go if you fund ourselves. So we are, and as you know, European is reluctant to provide weapons and system like that to African country. So there are a lot of discussion about that.
So I suppose this is the old France-Afrique card that is being played.
Yes, but at the same time, you know, everybody's always talking about the French, imperial or
post-colonial relationship.
Post-colonial.
Yes.
But let's be frank. I was at the Security Council. When you are at the Security Council and there is a crisis in Africa, everybody's looking at France. So of course, France has to do it. It's a bit the burden of an old imperial nation.
It's the realpolitik of
exactly.
the situation.
Everybody's asking for that. And the African, the president, we've got this meeting every year. What is he saying to the African? Do you really need us? And the Africans say, yes, we need you and we need more of you. So it's not only the French who wants that, it's really the African and the other countries.
It's reciprocal. Now, you did mention the A word there, and that is Afghanistan. I mean, how do you respond to people or those who say that France is risking being sucked into an extended military commitment in the Sahel that could become France's Afghanistan?
I think the situation is very different. The first thing is that we are asked by 5 African countries to stay there. First. Second, the threat is very close to Europe. It's our southern border. And so we have the risk that if there is a state, Islamic state, radical Islamic state, putting himself in this region, that then they will think to fight in Europe or elsewhere. You've got 2 organizations, Al-Qaeda and Daesh. Those 2 organizations clearly have a strategic plan to establish a state and then to fight elsewhere. And we are fighting against these people. That doesn't mean that you can't discuss with other people who have a problem inside Mali, for example, between the north and the south. But against these 2, Al-Qaeda and Daesh, you need to fight them.
Now, you mentioned there over the past year, since the increase of French deployment in the region, that there have been some successes, notably the neutralization, I think is the word that is like to be put out there, of the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb leader, that's Abdelmalek Drukel. But you're looking at this as a war that you're saying is very much on Europe's doorstep, southern border. But it can't be won conventionally, can it? This is,
of course,
when we have to get to the roots of the problem of the actual where the terrorism is born from. And there has to be responsibility taken by the governments involved as well.
Yes, you're right. I mean, the military is just one tool. They will not. They can win battles. They will not win the war, neither the peace. And that's when you see, for example, in Mali, in the north of Mali, the first meeting in Kidal with the government from Mali happened just a week ago.
Sure.
During 2 years, there were no meeting. This country must be committed because it's doing nothing if you're just killing soldier, jihadist, and then you've got other one arriving. Because when you give a Kalashnikov and $100 bucks to someone who has nothing, he will fight. So really, you need to have the state coming back in this region.
And you mentioned there, we both mentioned this is this Takuba force that is being established in Mali. Can you give us some information on that? Well, for one, who is in the force, and number 2, who does France want to get on board for the force?
And first, what's the aim of the force?
What is the aim of the force?
The aim of the force is to deploy special forces from Europe to be monitored for the African country, meaning that this soldier will go fighting with the African soldier. But I think there is a second role for these European forces. When a country has got special forces committed in the country, every day they send a report to the capital, and slowly the capital will be informed of what's happening in the country, which is of major importance. Because, for example, when you are in Bratislava, what is Mali? What is Niger? When you are in Estonia, what is Mali? What is Niger? So these are the two aims of the force. Fighting with the African country in order for them to raise their level of fighting skills. Second thing, informing the European country. Currently, you've got three countries who are deployed. Estonia, Czech Republic, and Sweden. The Italian will arrive in 2 weeks' time. You've got Greece, who already said that they will be there, Portugal. So you've got more and more country coming there. And I think it's very important, first, to show that it's a European problem. It's the south border, not of France, but of Europe. So it's very important to have this country here. Secondly, these special forces fighting together will have the sense of being part of the same thing, and will learn to work together and to work with the African country. And for the African country, it's very important because they've got the la pointe de diamant.
Oh, they've got the point of the diamond. The
point
diamond
of the
edge.
diamond,
yes,
who are fighting with you. And then there will be, I say the last operation, Barkhane, you have 2/3 of the soldiers are African.
Yeah.
So it's very important because that's their job to bring peace in their country.
And what is there a cap on the level of people who you're looking, or who France would be looking to join?
It depends really from any country. Look, for example, Estonia, a very small country, they are providing 30 people, but Czech Republic are providing perhaps 200 people. The Italian will provide 6 helicopters plus probably 200 soldiers. So it depends really from what country they are coming from.
So we could be able to take a stock about 6 months' time down the line and say
exactly.
See exactly where we
next summer we'll see what will happen. Yeah.
Now, at the opening of this G5 virtual summit, the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken issued a very supportive statement underlining U.S. commitment to being a good partner and looking forward to working together with the G5. What is France, or indeed the G5 themselves, hoping to get from the new Biden administration in Washington?
To stay in the region, to provide information and logistics as they are doing for years now, and very important. I mean, you just imagine that probably 2/3 of the logistic of Barkhane is provided by something else than the French means. American, British, Spanish, German, all these countries are providing 2/3 of the logistic means. So it's very important. And intelligence, of course, for the US. The French have probably 3 or 4 drones. The Americans have 20 of them. So you see the difference. And satellites. Some of the operations were triggered by information given by the US.
The US, okay. So a very important key element to the success of Barkhane and the G5 fighting the jihadists in the region. Well, coming back more to our local turf here, after 4 years of Donald Trump shunning the old allies in Europe and, of course, NATO, despite the change in leadership style, can we really expect a significant shift in US foreign policy towards the old continent? And there's still the thorny issue of participating countries giving their amount and contribution to NATO. So is that still going to be a massive change?
But first thing, coming back to Trump, I think it was very useful in NATO because then suddenly the Europeans discover that the support of the American support was not a given.
Yes.
And you've got to increase your budget, to increase your means when there is an increase of threat. So that was the good thing of the Trump administration. But coming back to the current situation, I think we've got two major changes. The first one is that the Biden administration is going back to multilateralism.
Sure.
And that's very important in all means, OMS, NATO, all the relations. So that's very important. The second very important point, I think, is that now you've got an administration and the president who are on the same line, which is something new.
Not tweeting one thing
exactly.
at midnight and then finding
exactly.
something else the next morning.
Last year you have a tweet during the night, and then the administration was running after the information. I think it changed a lot.
So it woke people up. It shook things up in NATO to have Trump in there. It was a good wake-up call, not to take things for granted. Well, the Financial Times was leading with the headline that Biden declares America is back and has pledged to repair the NATO alliance. Within your circles and within your expertise and the people that you rub elbows with, especially these days, seeing that you can't shake hands, is there a palpable sense of relief among NATO partners that the USA is back at the table?
Yes, I think it's a sort of relief, but at the same time, I hope that the Europeans will not drop their efforts. They need to make an effort. There is something, you're talking about budget and figures. Something very funny with the current crisis, the COVID crisis. A lot of countries are very close to 2%.
Yes.
Because they produce...
The GDP has gone
GDP
down.
gone down. France currently is 2%. But anyway, we've got to work together. Very often I repeat one sentence from Madame Parly, which I found very good.
Defense
she said,
Secretary here in France.
Yeah,
yes.
she said that Article 5 in NATO doesn't mean F-35.
Okay.
And I think it's very good. We need to work together on certain subjects. Cyber, the new tank, a new aircraft, things like that. Because America is back in a different way, but still they want to be the leader. Doesn't mean that the leader is always someone who you need to buy their equipment. You see?
It brings me now to the next point that I wanted to discuss with you, and that is about France's contribution, participation in this European Defence Fund. Now, do you agree that, following the Trump years, that strategic autonomy is essential for Europe's defence? I mean, there are a lot of people. I think Madame Parly herself, or her, I think it was maybe her colleague, her counterpart in the German defense ministry, who said it's a dangerous illusion that the EU is capable of defending itself without US support. Now, do you agree with that, or does the EU really have to start working towards autonomy in the face of any outside threats?
Yes, but working on autonomy doesn't mean that you don't need to be linked to the US. It means certainly that the threat is not always the same. The US can have a different view from the European, and some sort of aggression against the EU doesn't mean that it is an aggression against the US. And so I think that the European need to develop their autonomy for two reasons. First, because when the threat is not exactly the same for the US, they need to be able to react. The second thing is that in the industry, they need to be autonomous because,
interoperational as well.
At operational level, but also in export. In export, you don't need to be linked to equipment provided by the US, who in fact will decide if you will export or not export.
Sure.
This is the big difference. So develop the autonomy, certainly, but be linked with the US, because, of course, if we've got a major threat in Europe, we need the US.
Again, cohesion in Europe being one thing, cohesion within NATO, indeed, is another, seeing that there are other members of NATO who aren't exactly on the right side of the pitch at the moment. One could say that would be Erdogan in Turkey. Now, what about France's relations with Turkey and the recent standoff with Ankara over the oil and gas prospecting off Cyprus? Now, French support for Greece's position was very visible, and the dispute saw the deployment of aircraft carriers, a very physical military presence, in the Eastern Mediterranean. What was exactly in it for France to get involved in what was essentially a regional spat. Why did France go so strongly behind Greece?
No, I think it's not only a regional fact. It's a major problem.
A geopolitical?
Yes, exactly. And it is not linked to Turkey. It is linked to Erdogan. It's the policy of Erdogan. Policy, and you were talking about the Mediterranean, but we've got the problem in Syria, we've got the problem in Libya, we've got the problem in Armenia. So Mr. Erdogan wants to be a leader for the Sunni population and is very much linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. And so the threat for us is not only a threat in the Mediterranean, but it's a threat inside France with the Muslim Brotherhood. As you know, President Macron asked the Muslim movement in France to sign a charter where they say that the law of the French Republic is more important than their faith in public affairs, not in private affairs, of course. And the two organizations refused to sign it, and the two organizations are linked to Ankara. To Mr. Erdogan personally. So Mr. Erdogan have a big problem inside his country. He wins when the economy was brilliant. Now the economy is dropping down. And now you've got a problem inside Turkey. And that's why he was very aggressive outside Turkey to have the nationalist part of Turkish around him.
And what about the relationship between Macron and Erdogan? I mean, to what extent did their, let's just say, appalling, they have a terrible political and personal relationship. How much was their personal animosity, do you think, driving that flexing of military muscle?
But I think that Erdogan was using words that he will use in the street of Ankara, you know, like a bad boy. And President Macron was very cool on that. And he said, I'm not going on that
into
way.
That fight.
Yeah. But I think that Erdogan realized that he was going too far. He realized also that the French were deploying ships in the Mediterranean, but the Germans were head of the European Union at that time, were very strong on the diplomatic way. And he realized also that after Trump, he's got a problem with the US, because Mr. Biden was very straightforward against Turkey. So really, he has been too far in the last year. And you will notice that there are mods currently in Ankara and in Istanbul due to the nomination of the head of the university. And so you've got youngs in Turkey who are very much against Erdogan. And in the polls in Turkey now you've got Erdogan who is number 2 or 3. And the first one is the mayor of Ankara, for example.
Ankara. Now, staying in the region, and this is something as well that ties in with the new administration in Washington, when dealing with Iran, I mean, Turkey's input is obviously going to be required because they are neighbours, they have a shared border. Going to the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran that ex-President Donald Trump pulled out of, what do you think that we can expect in the coming 12 months? Will all the players come back to the table, and will they be looking for the same terms, or will they be looking for more?
Obviously, they are looking for more because when the agreement was signed, immediately everybody was saying that we didn't discuss about ballistic missiles, and
which they've continued to test, of course.
And so we've got to work more on that. But I think the position of Mr. Biden is at the same time very difficult and more easy. More easy, why? Because all the people who negotiate the agreement are currently in the administration. And Mr. Malone, for example, is appointed for the discussion. He has been in discussion for a year with the Iranians, so he knows very well. Second point is that because after the 4 years of Mr. Trump, there was a degradation of the relation. Now, there are elections in May in Iran. And so inside Iran, you've got people who want to be very strong and to say, we'll not accept what you say, we'll not go back to the agreement now. So there is a political fight inside Iran, which is very important.
Yes.
And Mr. Biden can't say simply, go back to the agreement with no discussion. Yeah. You've got to discuss to say, okay, if we go back to this agreement, we need to go further. in ballistic missile, for example, and other matters. And so during the election period in Iran, it will be very difficult to accept that for the Iranian leadership.
Is it? I suppose it's back to that old expression: "Speak softly, but with a very big stick."
Yeah, exactly.
That is going to be hanging over Iran. Now, General Trinquand, I just want to end our conversation today on. We're talking about very much hard power and military things. Now, what about soft power? What about the future of France as a soft power? Now, you see, it's a bit of a misnomer. Look at what's happening with China and Russia, and they're scoring huge political points through soft power because of the production and the distribution of COVID vaccines across Asia, the Middle East specifically as well, and parts of Africa. Unfortunately, France's leadership in the development of a vaccine is a very sore topic, as in it was a disaster with the Sanofi laboratory failing to win the race. What is the future, in your opinion, of France as a soft power in the world?
Yeah, and we've got a very interesting point on vaccine, is that no industry in France developed the vaccine, but 2/3 of the company, mainly in UK and US, who developed the vaccine are headed by French. So we've got
there's an irony there.
No, but we've got a problem. We've got very good education in France. We've got people who are very able, and they go elsewhere because of the problem of money and because they are well paid there, not paid there. They've got more means there, and etc.
A brain drain, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, so we've got to do something on that. President Macron is trying to do that, but it is very difficult. And you must remember that in 1 year time we've got election in France. So all which will be developed on that will depend on the election in France. But certainly President Macron is convinced that we've got to do more in soft power. That was what you've got all this meeting in France with all sort of industry, education and all that. The relation with Africa, which is very important, because we've got specific links with the African country, which is the future of Europe.
And the future of the French language as well.
Also, you're right. And the French soft power is probably lower than it was when you see that, for example, in the EU currently, everybody's speaking English, except that after the Brexit, you've got no British. So it's funny. But I agree. We've got to do more. We've got many tools to do more, but we need to invest in that. And we need probably sometimes to be more aggressive. For example, in cyber, Madame Parly, the Secretary of State for Defense in France, was very clear. We will be offensive. And something very interesting, a Chinese researcher 2 days ago told me that in the ranks, French is not bad in software. I didn't challenge her, so I didn't look at the figure. But she said, I was very surprised looking in research on that the French were not too bad. So
well, there's hope at the end of the tunnel there. Well, it's very interesting from an outside perspective, especially from abroad, saying that they're doing very well here in France. So we shall see how soft power and French soft power in the world develops over the coming years. General Dominique Trinquand, thank you very much for being on the programme today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're more than welcome. Thank you.